Hello everyone and welcome on into today's video. So in this lecture, in this next series here, we're going to be starting the tissues for anatomy and physiology. So the tissues are the building blocks of all the other systems. So understanding the foundational principles of these tissues, the cells and the fibers that make them up, help you understand the future organs. So when you put multiple tissues together, that's then what makes an organ. The first group of tissues we're going to go into today are the epithelial tissues. These tissues are the linings and coverings, but to start, we're going to go into a general overview of all the tissues we're going to talk about. Within all of these tissues, we're going to identify the cellular and non-cellular components of them. So there are certain cells that make them up, and then there are also different fibers and things like that that can make them up, and they have these different characteristics and properties of each one. The focus of this video are the epithelial tissues, so we're going to look at squamous, cuboidal, and columnar, simple, and stratified. Now, just a general overview of all the tissues. Like I said, we are focused on the epithelial tissues here. These are the linings and the coverings. So all the linings of all the hollow organs except the heart are lined with epithelial tissues, and your skin is an epithelial tissue, your epidermis. So these areas, we'll talk about the properties of epithelial tissues, highly regenerative cells, because these are areas where there's a lot of abrasion, so the cells are constantly being replaced. And then there's connective tissue. These are the binding and the support and the cushioning of the body. So that includes fat, bones, tendons. So we'll talk about the different connective tissue propers, dense, um, loose, irregular, and so forth, and all those connective tissues, and also the cartilage. Blood is also considered a connective tissue, and we'll talk about it there as well. Connective tissues, that's a big broad category, and that would be its own video after this one. And then in the last video, we're going to go into the three types of muscle tissue: cardiac, smooth, and skeletal. So cardiac is for the heart, skeletal is what you're voluntary, and smooth is also in the linings of hollow organs and is involuntary. And then in that video, we'll also talk about nervous tissue, so brain, spinal cord, and the associated nerves that go with that. So three lecture videos going over the tissues, and I think I'm going to add a fourth video where it's kind of like a histology lab, and I'll show you some microscope images that I have taken of these tissues, and we can go through and look at all the various properties. Alrighty, let's get in the epithelial tissues now. Now, first part here, we're going to look at the characteristics and classifications of them. First, this term called polarity. This means their sidedness. When we look at these cells, they have a side to them. They're different on the top and the bottom, typically. So that's a nucleus. So this top could have cilia or microvilli on it. So this would be the apical side, and this would be the basal side of this particular cell. So they have a sidedness. And then they have specialized contacts. This brings in the different ways cells hold themselves together or communicate via gap junctions, where there are actual channels between two cells. Desmosomes, which are kind of like a Velcro, allow a little stretch to those cells, and then tight junctions, which don't let anything in between them and are a tight adherence of two cells to each other. So those are the different kinds of contacts these cells have. And think about it, you don't want your stomach acid leaking out or the contents of your bladder leaking through. You want that supported, but you also want it to be able to be stretched. So they're a mix of desmosomes and tight junctions. And also all of these are supported by a connective tissue layer underneath, called the basement membrane. And we'll go over these connective tissues more in the connective tissues video, but all epithelial tissue has a connective tissue layer right underneath. And they are avascular but innervated. What this means, avascular, means they lack blood vessels. So when you go like this on your skin, on your epidermis, you don't bleed. It's only if you go down into the dermal layer that you start bleeding, because that's where the blood vessels are. So avascular means lacks blood vessels. Innervation is talking about nerves, so sensory input. So you do have some sensory receptors found in your epidermis and some epithelial tissue. So they are considered innervated, meaning a nerve goes to them. And also I mentioned they are highly regenerative. So these cells are growing and dividing and replacing from underneath, like your epidermis constantly growing up as dead cells on the top are falling off. All right, so now what are the different classifications? And it's pretty simple when we look at epithelial tissues, because they just come in different categories. First, they're either simple or they are stratified. Simple means one layer, stratified means more than one layer of cells. And so you see in the simple column here, this is all one layer of cells, stratified, multiple layers. And then it's based on their shape. So we have squamous, cuboidal, and columnar. So simple squamous is one thin layer of flat-like cells. So simple squamous. Your lung alveoli are examples of simple squamous. Simple cuboidal. Simple cuboidal, these are cube-like cells. So these cells actually look like cubes. Places like your thyroid gland, you have these simple cuboidal cells. And then simple columnar, this is one layer of column-like cells. Typically, these do have like cilia or microvilli on the end to increase the surface area, like the lining of your digestive system. And there you also see the nuclei in these cells. So these are the simple ones. And so down here, some different examples of them. Like I said, the air sacs of the lungs, lymphatic vessels, blood vessels lining of them, simple cuboidal. Some kidney tubules also have these. So these are focused on secretion and absorption. This thin layer here is focused on areas where gas exchange is happening and things like that. Simple columnar here, ciliated tissues in larger bronchioles, uterine tubes, and uterus. So the cilia helps move mucus and things around, and then digestive tract, bladder, so microvilli. So these are absorbed, secreting mucus and enzymes. And then here it says one pseudo-stratified columnar. Was that one up here? Yeah. So pseudo-stratified. Pseudo means false, stratified means layer. So this one literally translates to false layers. And when you look at this in the microscope, these nuclei are all spread out. So it might make you think there's a layer here, and a layer here. It might make you think it's stratified. So it's called false layered. And these are usually false layered because there's these larger mucus secreting cells called goblet cells that are embedded in the layer, and they're typically ciliated as well. So here, these ones lines the bronchi and the trachea. Trachea is a big one, the mucus escalator, bringing mucus up and out of the lungs. So most of the upper respiratory tract are these pseudo-stratified ones. So those are all the simple. So simple epithelial layers right there. And now we get into the stratified, which means there are multiple layers of cells. The first one is stratified squamous. So stratified squamous are multiple layers of flattened-like cells. If you notice, you might be able to consider this one cuboidal down here. However, it's named based upon the apical side or the upper side of the layer. So like the top of your skin here, so your epidermis, the lining of your esophagus, all of those are these stratified squamous. So these cells are typically dead and they just slough off with abrasion as new cells are growing and pushing up from underneath. So these is areas where there's a lot of abrasion going on. And then there are stratified cuboidal and stratified columnar. So two layers of cube-like cells. And here, two layers of column-like cells. So these ones are a bit more rare. So we don't come across these ones too often, but they are found in some areas. So here we'll talk about the different stratified ones. Like I said, squamous, esophagus, mouth, vagina is another place, protects against abrasion. And then stratified cuboidal, sweat glands, salivary glands, mammary glands, protective tissue. And then stratified columnar, just male and female urethrae, and then ducts of some glands. So not as common. These are a bit more rare there. Then the last one we have is called transitional epithelium. What this one means is that, look, if you look at it, it's like, oh, this is stratified, but then these look like cubes, so you might think stratified cuboidal. However, as fluids push out, they compress, and then the cells can become more squamous-like, meaning, so transitional epithelium usually in areas that are moving volume. So you see bladder, urethra, ureters, and things like that. So as the volume pushes out, that epithelial layer also compresses, so the cells transition from a cube-like cell to a squamous-like cell, or from a columnar to a cuboidal. So it allows that expansion and stretch of those organs. Last thing I want to talk about in this video here is that within the epithelial linings are glands. I mentioned mucus-producing cells. The mucus is produced by these things called goblet cells, the unicellular secretory cells. So here you see a goblet cell. It kind of looks like a goblet. You got a lot of Golgi apparatus and rough ER, so a lot of secretory vesicles containing a protein called mucin. When mucin gets secreted, it mixes with water, and that's what then becomes what we know as mucus. Mucus is a lubricating, thick substance found. So here we can see there's a nucleus, these little goblet cells that then are secreting mucus out into these areas. So really cool cells of these mucus secreting cells right here, found in a lot of epithelial linings for our mucous membranes. And then last little thing I want to mention in this, not really showing any images, are other modes of secretion for these glands. Endocrine secretions are secretions that occur from glands inside the body. Not really going to be talking about it much here because there's an entire chapter on the endocrine system that we'll go into later, but endo means inside. Exo is more specific to what we're talking about today. Exocrine secretions are secreted outside. Now, that's not just your skin for your sweat glands and your oil glands that are for your hair. Exocrine external is also the linings of your respiratory tract, your digestive tract, and your urinary tract. Those are all considered exocrine secretions. So a lot of those secrete not only the mucus producing cells, but via duct networks. Now, we're not going to go into details of the different types of ducts, whether they can be alveolar or simple or compound, depending on their structure. We're not going to go into those details here, but they can have some different modes of secretion, whether they're secreting something like lipids where the cell membrane kind of just fragments off and the cell explodes, or they secrete things via like sweat, via just normal vesicle secretion and things like that. So there are different modes of secretion and different types of ducts, but just note that if you ever see exocrine, these glands are within the epithelial layers, and also they are secreting things outside the body. Mainly it means they're involved with interacting with the external environment. All right, that's the little rundown of epithelial tissues. In the next video, we're going to be going into connective tissue, so the various connective tissues, dense and loose, and then the cartilage, blood, and bone as well. But if you have any questions from this video, please just let me know. That's all I have for this one. Bye-bye.